Hebrews chapter 1, it says this about Jesus, that long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, He has spoken to us by His Son, whom He appointed the heir of all things, through whom also He created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of His nature. And He upholds the universe by the word of His power. After making purification for sins, He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name He has inherited is more excellent than theirs. For to which of the angels did God ever say, "You are my Son, today I have begotten you"? Or again, "I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son." And again, when He brings the firstborn into the world, He said, "Let all God's angels worship Him." Of the angels, He says, He makes His angels winds and His ministers a flame of fire. But of the Son, He says this, "Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of uprightness is the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. And you, Lord, laid the foundation of the earth in the beginning, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will remain. They will all wear out like a garment, like a robe. You will roll them up like a garment. They will be changed, but you are the same, and your years will have no end. And to which of the angels has He ever said, 'Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet'? Are they not all ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation?" Jesus is the center of everything that we find in Scripture. The entirety of the Old Testament points towards Him. The gospel narratives are a picture of His life. And everything that Paul writes is a result of His resurrection. He must increase. That's the nature of Scripture. That's the point of Scripture, that Jesus must increase.
John also was baptizing at Aenon near Salem, because water was plentiful there, and people were coming and being baptized. For John had not yet been put in prison. Now a discussion arose between some of John's disciples and a Jew over purification. And they came to John and said to him, "Rabbi, he who was with you across the Jordan, to whom you bore witness, look, he is baptizing, and all are going to him." John answered, "A person cannot receive even one thing unless it is given him from heaven. You yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. The one who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom, who stands and hears him, rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. Therefore, this joy of mine is now complete. He must increase, but I must decrease."
Isaiah tells us that the grass withers and the flowers fade. Baptism is an interesting thing, especially when you begin to consider what it means for us today, and how when we look at this passage in John chapter 3, that it had a different meaning, a very unique meaning. One of the things that we talk about when you have a church service that meets at the exact same time that another church service meets is, well, what do you do with baptism? How do we baptize? Will we baptize? Is that going to be something that we do? Are we going to send them over there? Are we going to drip water on their head? No. Or what are we going to do with people in regards to baptism? And if you're here and you've never placed your faith in Jesus, never trusted in Jesus, but you're interested in what it means to do that, then baptism is a possibility here. We can do that here. If you're a member and you're not a member and you're like, I've been part of both services, I would like to be baptized, I want you to know that is up to you. And we trust that to you. And we believe that God's at work in you and He will lead you to do that. But just know, if you want to be baptized in this service, then we can make that happen. We can make that happen in a very different way. I have a friend at a church in Middle Valley who owns a portable baptistry. Not personally, because that would be odd. But his church owns a portable baptistry, and because not every church in town, sadly, gets to baptize every week, they let other churches use it. And they have said to us that we can use the baptistry. We brought it over here once just to see how it's set up, to see how it would fit. And it just sat here for a little while because they never called. And when we would plan to take it back, we would not, it would rain or something, and you don't want thing that holds water to get wet. So we would keep it here, and it would just stay in the closet back here. Zach calls me a couple of weeks ago, and he says to me, Chad, we need the baptistry. And I said, sure enough, we will make that happen for Easter Sunday. So David and I, our church administrator, throw the whole thing in the back of his truck. And it's made up primarily of three pieces: a heater, a pump, and plastic. So we throw what we think is all of the baptistry in the back of David's truck, and we take it over there, remembering it's made up of three parts: a heater, a pump, and plastic. And I get a phone call the next day from their church administrator, and he says, Chad, we're missing two pieces to the baptistry. There's only three. He said, we're missing the heater and the pump. I said, awesome. All I've brought to you is the plastic. So I think I've got a picture, maybe I don't, of what that heater, and that's it. That's it. And the thing costs a certain amount of money, and that cost really covers this. The plastic they had taken care of, but this was the majority of the price of this baptistry. So we're just looking all over the building. Where did we put this? Did we take it to my office? Because things go there to die. Well, where are the things? Where are these two things? We go in this closet. We can't find them. I am panicking. So I get on the phone with this baptistry, this portable baptistry company in Seattle, Washington. And when I called them, the phone conversation was pretty unique because they'd never had anyone lose pieces before. And I'm talking to the lady on the phone. She says, let me put you on hold. Seattle, Washington, different time zone. When she puts me on hold, the song Bye 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 by NSYNC begins to play. So not only are we in a different time zone, we're in a different decade. And how am I going to time travel this thing here? So it's like I was on TRL, on hold. So I'm on the phone with her. She establishes for me how we'll make this baptistry happen. I eventually work out all the details. And then we realize that someone who has placed a multitude of musical cables on top of the box. I won't name any names, but I don't play with musical cables. But there are musical cables on the box. Now, we find it. We deliver it. Everything's fine. But the idea was, what are we going to do with this baptistry? What are we going to do to baptize? How are we going to have an impact? How are we going to have an effect? These are just some of the things that you work through. When we get to John, you've got a similar situation because you've got these men who've committed themselves to following after John. If you'll pick up with me in John chapter 3, beginning in verse 22. Jesus and his disciples went to the Judean countryside, and he remained there with them and was baptizing. So his disciples are baptizing. And the baptism at this point was different than the one that we would take part in if you come to faith in Jesus. This is not a baptism into the covenant family of God. This is a baptism that says, my sins are a big deal, which is huge. That's what John did. He preached to people who were part of the nation of Israel. And all of his preaching was directed towards them. And their entire mindset was this: because we are part of the nation of Israel, everything's fine. But he goes and he preaches to the outskirts and to the edges, and he has all of these common people who have been largely ignored by the religious elite, who hear him, and they realize that it's not fine because of their status. That they need to confess that they're sinners, that they need to say, yes, we need to be baptized. So John sets the bar high, baptizing, calling people out. And then Jesus and his disciples begin to baptize as well. Well, as we look at parallel text, we see that Jesus, he did not actually baptize. His disciples did for him. And here's the situation in verse 23. John was baptizing at Aenon near Salim because water was plentiful there, which they didn't have portable baptistry, so they had to find a place with plenty of water. And people were coming and being baptized because John was not yet in prison. Verse 25, now a discussion arose among some of John's disciples and a Jew over purification. So the conversation comes up. Hey, how's purification work? And since we've got a situation where this Jesus is baptizing down the road and you're baptizing here, it's kind of weird that the people who at one time were coming to you, they're now going to him. They're going to him. They're following after him. They're seeking to be baptized by his followers. Jesus, tell me this. What's this? Or John, tell me, what's the situation? Verse 26, they come to John and say to him, Rabbi, he who is with you across the Jordan, to whom you bore witness, look, he's baptizing. And all, they're going to him. Everybody's going to Jesus. Now, when we look historically, and one of the things that I said about the passage of John the Baptist just a few weeks ago was there was a point in his ministry where John was the most popular man in the area. More popular than Jesus. And now, largely because of the words of John and because he has said about this Jesus, he's the promised one, people are leaving John. His followers are leaving him. And what takes place in the heart of his followers is this, just a little bit of jealousy, envy, struggle with the fact that they're not as important as they once were. Jealousy can rear its ugly head in any of our lives. When I was in college, I worked a camp, and on that staff is a guy who's now on the New York Times bestseller list. He speaks at large conferences. He is wildly popular, and it's very easy to get caught up in the idea of comparison. I have another friend that I've shared about who travels and speaks at youth events, and very much like what I do, except he travels and preaches at larger youth events, and he also has his hair completely dyed. He's much more popular than me. Even in an area that's not stage-driven, in the important area of ministering to your congregation. A couple of years ago, when our former pastor, Brother Bill Owens, was still here, it was very difficult when you would do hospital visits because Brother Bill is like a hospital ninja. He sneaks indoors, outdoors, you never know where he's at. He knows codes to things that you shouldn't know codes to. Nurses are saying, "Can I get you a cup of coffee?" It's a very odd situation. So in any of those areas, whether it's stage-driven or just the idea of interacting among the people of your church, you can get caught up in comparison. And John's guys are not unnatural in feeling this. But John is supernatural in responding to it. Their feelings are not unnatural, but John's response is supernatural. Verse 27, John answered, "A person cannot receive even one thing unless it's given to him from heaven." Did we miss that? A person cannot receive more than one thing that's given to him from heaven. John is acknowledging in this moment, as every one of his followers are struggling with the idea of what it means for the people to leave them and follow Jesus, that what he's been given is God-given. That what has been placed, the task that has been handed to him, has been placed there by God himself. And that if he is to be more popular, then that is appointed to God. If he is to have a larger influence, that is a result of God giving him larger influence. But John is satisfied in this situation because he realizes there's nothing that I get that's not God-given. How often are we at those places? How often do we get so caught up in the idea of comparison, the idea of looking at ourselves in light of someone else, that we miss the joy of pointing people towards Jesus? That we miss the opportunity that God gives us to point people towards Jesus? How many of you guys serve as a gatekeeper for someone? Here's what I mean by that. How many of you, someone at your office, someone at your place of business, someone in your industry, they know that you're a follower of Jesus. And we're not sure why. Maybe you're very outspoken about your faith, praise the Lord. Maybe you've got a coffee cup with some verse on it, maybe or a bumper sticker. Maybe you've got a fish tattooed across your forehead. Maybe you've got one of these things in your life, and they know that you follow Jesus, that they know at very least you're connected to Jesus. Right? We got those people? How many of you guys in those relationships does their spiritual formation rest on you? How many of us are pointing people beyond us to something greater? How often can we get caught up in this? Just feeling like, and it's subconscious at times, they come to us and we feel like we have been blessed because they've come to us, because they trust us as a spiritual guide, as a person who trusts in Jesus. But that conversation never goes beyond them meeting with you. How many times do we realize that that's not the point? The point is not for them to bring you prayer requests, even though you should pray for their prayer requests. The point is not for them to be able to confide in you, even though I'm thankful they confide in you. The point is, in the midst of that sharing of requests and you pointing them towards God, the point is for you to go beyond yourself. How many of us are encouraging that group of people, those friends, those family members, to not see us as their spiritual support system, but to trust in Jesus? How many of us are talking to them about what it means to place their faith in Jesus? How many of us are talking to them about what it means to be connected to a family of faith, to be connected to a church body? Well, we may say, well, Chad, that's odd. Those are hard conversations, and they're not ready for that. There's never going to be a point where they're ready for that. That doesn't happen. Because what takes place is that when we look into Scriptures in 1 Corinthians, it lets us know that the idea of following after Jesus and the idea of the cross of Jesus, that's foolishness to people who don't believe. But for those who trust in God, that's our salvation. The cross is our salvation. Are you pointing people towards the cross? Or is your heart to see them know Jesus? This week I went to a conference in Louisville, and Bill Winchester, one of our members, Hunter McGlaughlin, and Tyler Mills, they go to this conference with me. And it's Preacher Palooza, basically. Just a bunch of really big-time preachers. And so I don't know what they're going to think about all this, but we ate some pretty good food, so that got us through. So we're there at Preacher Palooza. It comes to a conclusion, and we're going to drive home, get home around 3:30 in the morning because Tyler has to work at 7 a.m. the next day because we made a good decision. And as we're driving through the night, there comes a point where we get hungry. That was pretty early. So we're driving, and we decide to stop at a northern specialty, a northern hotspot. We stopped at a place called White Castle. Does anybody know what a White Castle is? They're like crystals, but worse. And so we stop at White Castle. Let me remind you, they are similar to crystals. Whatever you take from this story, no, we ate something similar to a crystal, which is never a good idea. So we stop and we get these and we go in, and Bill is just bouncing as we walk into this place like he owns the establishment. And as we go into the restaurant and we begin to order these White Castle burgers and order the fries, Bill says to Tyler and to Hunter and to myself, make sure that you get a cup of Big Red. I don't know if you know what Big Red is. Bill just pulled this barrel out, the largest cup I've ever seen. And we go in and he begins to fill up his Big Red. Now for me, the Big Red, it was different. Like, it's pretty much like carbonated bubblegum water. So we go in and Bill fills up his cup and he takes a drink and he says, man, that's good. And then I take a drink and I'm like, that's the worst thing I've ever put in my mouth. And then Hunter takes a drink and he says, nope, no more for me. And then Tyler's like, that is so good. He ordered a case right then and there. You have 4 people. 2 of whom said, this is delicious. This is something I want more of. 2 of whom said, I don't want anything to do with this. When we talk about the cross being folly and foolishness to those who are outside of God, on the flip side of that coin, to those of us who have been rescued, to those of us who have been brought in, to those of us who have been made right before a holy God, it is the point and the way in which we are saved. Do we get that? Here's the deal. In your sharing of your life with your coworker, please know that your personal testimony is used by God. And your opportunities to share about your struggles in your life, those are used by God. But those are supplementary. The idea that our personal testimony is what is going to save people, that is foolishness in and of itself. But the God to whom you testify, the cross by which you were saved, drawn in, made right, that's what we celebrate. That's what they should know. Are we so caught up in the fact that God has given us a holy huddle or a holy follower at work that we miss the opportunity that He has given us to say, beyond me, there's something else. Beyond me, there's something more. Because primarily, here's the deal. God created. We rebelled. God made a way, provided a way in which that could be made right. And that's Jesus. Your testimony comes alongside of that. But your testimony does not make that grand story of the Bible any better. He's who He is. Let's direct our attention to that. Let's look at the passage and we see what happens. 28. You yourselves bear witness that I said, I'm not the Christ. John's already said that. He has repeated himself. But I was sent before Him. The one who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom, who stands and hears Him, rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. So we've got to back up just to acknowledge what's about to take place here. We're talking about the friend of the bridegroom, or the best man, if you will. Ladies in the room who are married or who are dating someone, I want you to think of your husband's best friend. And now I want you to raise your hand to acknowledge that clown in your life, right? We got him. That was, yes, we raised our hands, right? We know who those best friends are. Now I want you to imagine this, that best friend, he has a huge influence in your wedding. Here's what this guy would be. It's called the shushman in Scripture, and we should probably use that word more often in English. He's a little more involved than Tricky Ricky or Crazy Ned was at your wedding. Here's who he is. He was the liaison between the bride and the bridegroom. That's the guy that's going to make sure that you're connected. He was instrumental in the arranging of the wedding and in inviting people to the wedding. Crazy Ricky sending out the invitations. He brought the bride and the bridegroom together, and he made sure that the bridal chamber was protected from anyone except for the bridegroom. That's the job of this guy. And John is using this illustration to talk about what it means for him to usher people to Jesus. To bring people to Jesus. To unite people with Jesus. He is ultimately saying that this union, it's not about me. And in many of your lives, God is using you in people's lives to bring them to an understanding of Jesus, to help them to know Jesus, to help them to hear about Jesus, maybe even to grow in a faith in Jesus. But if the end of that is them thinking that Jesus is cool because they think you're cool, you've missed it. And I've missed it, if that's where I end. Are we moving beyond faith in people with Jesus' decoration? We got to. If we're going to see kingdom growth, we have to. If we're going to see people moving forward in their faith relationship, we have to. You're not the point. I'm not the point. He's the point. Celebrate Him. Let's look together at the passage. Verse 29, the one who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. Therefore, this joy of mine is complete. John says, I've done everything that I could do. I've connected every dot that I can connect. I've made sure that this is directed in the way it's supposed to be directed. What about you? Are you okay? There may be a time where that friendship that you've invested so heavily in, where you pass the baton. Are you fine with the fact that there is a possibility that person's accountability, that person's discipleship, that person's mentorship is going to go beyond you? Are we satisfied in the idea, not that we have a relationship that is connected to God, but that we have a relationship that is solely about God? Are we celebrating? Are we rejoicing in the fact that Jesus is going to redeem, that Jesus is going to unite? Now, we look at the passage in verse 30 is John's closing of this thought. He must increase. And I must decrease. I think for us that the first part of that we get because we're churched. He must increase. Like if you've been here more than 3 times, that should resonate with you. That He must increase. Not that we're there, not that we're perfect, not that we're ultimate, but that Jesus must increase. But for us at times it is He must increase, but I wouldn't mind still having some attention. He must increase. Bottom line. He must increase and I must decrease. I must pull back. I must step away. I must see what's taking place. I must trust that God is moving. He must increase. In our own lives, where's He increasing? And how are we decreasing? In your own relationship. I have Chad days, heavy Chad days. Yesterday I was with the kids a lot. And in the afternoon, there were moments where I wasn't focused. I wasn't focused on the fact that this is not a moment, raising my children, where I'm just in the backyard with them, but that Christ must increase in that, and I must decrease. And there are days that I miss that in my marriage, where He must increase and I must decrease. I'm just being honest with you. I hope this is an honest place for us. That there are times in work relationships where I miss the fact that He must increase and I must decrease. Is Jesus being made more prevalent, and am I being made less prevalent when I am doing what He's called me to do? When I'm living out what He has placed before me, He must increase. For you as a business person, do people see that Jesus must increase and that you must decrease, and that everything that you have is not about your hard work, though you definitely worked hard. Not about your effort, though you definitely placed effort, but the fact that ultimately that's God-given. In your friendships, in the blessings that God gives you in life, in your good grades, are we ultimately saying, He must increase and I'm going to step away? I don't want any of the attention for this. Now, we give lip service to that because we live in the South. But are our hearts there? That He must increase. Because He is redeemed, because He has worked, because He is drawn, because He is called, He must increase. Is that where we are as a body of believers? Is that going to have an effect on your community? It should. His increase and your decrease should be making an imprint, a rubber stamp on your neighborhood. His increase and your decrease, that should have an effect on your family. His increase and your decrease, that should say something to your family members, that you're beyond your immediate family. It should say something to them. His increase and your decrease. When you make decisions in life, ultimately we realize nothing is given to us unless God has given it. He must increase. In your marriage, in every aspect of life, He must increase and we must decrease. Are we seeing His increase? And if so, because I don't even know we're seeing that, are we seeing our decrease? Stepping away from the light. Because ultimately that light's to be on Him. Because He is the light. He must increase. The whole point of this text, what John says to us, John the writer, about Jesus and John the Baptist. John is satisfied with the idea that all that I have is given by God. And all that I am is to be someone who points towards Jesus. A spotlight holder on Jesus. Is that you? Is that you? Every friendship, every relationship, every interaction, for the sake of His increase. Are we there? No. Are we progressing in that direction? I hope so. I pray that for myself, and I pray that for you. I want to pray over us, and then we're going to stand together, and we're going to quote the Great Commandment as a body of believers, because that is fully focused on His increase. Let me pray for you. God, You're good to us, and we thank You for Your goodness. We thank You for Your love. We thank You for Your mercy. God, I pray that as we come to a place in our service where we state the Great Commandment together, God, I pray that'll be our hope in our heart, your increase. And we will be more than satisfied with our decrease.